Hi guys! So Becca and Jonathan made a really interesting video yesterday about white privilege, and they weren't like, you guys weren't specific about like what you were having to educate dumb white bitches about, or like what context it was in. But it was interesting. Your video was interesting for me because, like, you guys know I'm half Chinese, but I don't look half Chinese, which is something that bothers me a little bit because it's something that I identify so much with the culture, and um like, but I look white and that's it. And so I have this white privilege of like not having Asian stereotypes applied to me, and I mean amongst other things obviously, but like specific to that. But then like in the Asian community I don't really fit in because I don't look the part and they don't take me seriously. It's like, oh, you're not really Chinese, which I mean, I think is a problem that all mixed people have. And so I think the thing with privilege of any kind, because there's so many different kinds of privilege, is just do your best to educate yourself and then don't be an asshole. And it's really that easy. Because, I mean, understanding privilege is understanding that you're in a situation where everything should be equal, all races should be equal, all sexuality should be equal, all gender identity should be equal, but that's not how it is. And then you take that information and now how it applies to your life, and then you don't be an asshole. Get it? Got it? Good. Okay. It was interesting that you guys posted this video when you did, because actually the other day, well, for my English class, we got to write a research paper on the topic of our choosing, and there's a person in my class who wrote about feminism and how it affects men, and how it's beneficial for men, for both genders to be considered equal, which I thought was really interesting. The person who wrote this paper is genderqueer, and they talked about also how like feminism affects people who are non-binary in gender, or transgender or gay, which was really cool. And so, although I know that this person who wrote this paper, I know that they are biologically female, I'm not going to refer to them as she because I'm not an asshole. You know, you just have to know what's going on. You have to try to educate yourself. You have to care. My point that I'm getting to is that they were talking about how a bunch of the sources that they had to sift through when they were doing their research on feminism were articles written by men who were being really stupid and saying things like, oh, well, feminism like just makes men like less powerful and all this bullshit. And so they were saying, you can't be sexist towards men the same way that you can't be racist towards white people. And then the class was like, what? And I was just kind of like, can we not talk about this? Because it is obviously something that's very important to talk about, but it's also something that's very tricky to talk about. And so we did get into it a little bit because right off the bat, this white guy and this African American girl, who is the only African American girl in my class, were like, that's a thing. Like, racism towards white people is a thing. And so my professor who teaches the African American lit class here had to kind of step in and saying, racism is not the same as discrimination because it takes it a step further. In racism, there's an element of power and there's an element of oppression that's not, present in the same way when it's just discrimination. But then the thing with that is that my professor who teaches the African American lit class is a white woman, and I'm not saying that that's not okay, but it gets a little weird, like it's complicated, it really is. And so my professor ended up saying something that I thought was interesting, which is she said, I don't see races, I see one race, the human race. And that is kind of the same thing as saying that you're colorblind, and then some people would be like, oh, well, you don't see color, then like you don't recognize that like there are different races, and you don't recognize that like certain groups of people have privilege. And so it does get into that again. So it is really complicated. Pretty much everything I've learned about all of this, I learned from Tumblr, which is kind of weird because it's obviously very biased because it's coming from different people. And there's also like this kind of overwhelming pressure to be politically correct 100% of the time, and that's really not possible. I mean, you can try and you should try, but you're gonna mess up. And I mean, I don't want to say that it's okay, but like, mistakes happen. You're gonna say something that offends someone, and then you're gonna go apologize for it because you're not an asshole. Really, what you just have to do is educate yourself and don't be an asshole. Alright, I'll see you guys next week.